Behind the facades of perfection lay a conspiracy, lies, betrayals, and a plan that could destroy everything she had built, or cost her her life. As the city below shimmered indifferently, Helena realized that the true danger came not from unknown enemies, but from those she had always loved. Every move, every code, and every decision made in the coming days would determine the fate of an empire, her family, and her own freedom. You're about to enter a story of intrigue, power, and revenge, where nothing is what it seems and each revelation is more shocking than the last. Subscribe to the channel now and stay up to date on every detail of this intense plot. Don't miss the chance to discover how far Helena's courage can take her, and what will be revealed about the Mendes family. The air in the luxury penthouse on the 35th floor of one of the most elegant skyscrapers on Faria Lima Avenue in São Paulo, Brazil, carried a weight all its own. It wasn't just the muggy atmosphere of a humid city night, but a dense, almost palpable sensation that every inch of the space breathed power, and at the same time, falseness. The mirrored glass reflected the lights of the metropolis, transforming the space into a box of illusions. The predominant tone was light gray, polished steel, and varnished surfaces, an aesthetic that purported to be sophisticated, but ultimately carried a sterile emptiness. The entire setting was a faithful representation of what the Mendes Group sold to the world: technology, innovation, modernity. But behind the perfect reflections lurked the jammed machinery of a family on the brink of collapse. Helena Castro walked silently through the space that, ironically, she herself had helped to build. At 55, her serene face bore the marks of a life of discipline, but also of constant vigilance. She lacked the flamboyant vanity of the socialites who orbited her husband, nor the affected arrogance of her children. She preferred understated clothing, straight cuts, and sober colors. But her eyes, two dark, attentive dots like binary codes in perpetual processing, were the true signature of her presence. Helena was a software architect, and although Artur Mendes, her husband, was the public face of the empire, all the technological foundations that supported the Mendes Group bore her invisible signature. Artur, at 60, had the calculated charisma of those who know how to sell illusions. His smile was wide, his gestures expansive, his voice filled the spaces like an actor who never leaves the stage. For him, the Mendes Group was an extension of his persona, grand, unbeatable, indispensable. He enjoyed parties, speeches, and being celebrated. For many, he was the visionary genius who had put the company on the global map. For Helena, he was just a man who had learned to memorize lines but never wrote a single line of the code that sustained his fortune. The children were expensive satellites shaped by their father's false brilliance. Felipe Mendes, 30, a Harvard graduate, wore his cynicism like a tailored suit. The world, for him, was a chessboard, with all the pieces prearranged so he would never lose. Laura Mendes, 28, owned Joalheria Aurora, a luxury store nestled in Jardins, financed by discreet investments that had drained from her mother's coffers. Unlike her mother, Laura believed that elegance was all about shine, exuberant necklaces, diamonds encrusted in every accessory, display windows that screamed ostentation. To her, Helena was merely a domestic manager, efficient but outdated, an outdated piece of software no longer suited to the family's new system. And then there was Barbara Ramos, the senior design consultant, always present, always in the shadows. 40 years old with green eyes like sharp blades, an engaging but cold presence. Artur presented her as the group's futuristic vision, the creative mind who would lead them into the next era of technology. Helena, with her trained instinct, immediately recognized the danger. Barbara wasn't just a collaborator. She was a hostile variable infiltrated into the system, and like all malicious code, her true function was hidden. At that moment, tension hovered like a dormant volcano. The world believed the Mendes Group was experiencing a golden age. The newspapers extolled the record profits, the international expansions, the billion-dollar contracts. Artur was preparing an extravagant party to celebrate Helena's 55th birthday, a spectacle tailored to impress investors and allay any suspicion. But for Helena, The celebration was just another play in a cynical theater. For 6 months, she had been tracking anomalies in the financial statements, sudden, unjustified password changes, suspicious patent liquidations. Something was afoot, something that had nothing to do with growth, but with destruction. It was on a rainy night as the city drenched outside that the truth exploded in her ears. Helena was in the library, surrounded by shelves of technology books, but with her eyes fixed on an ancient monitor running a discrete interface. The listening device she had designed, disguised as an air purifier in Arthur's secret meeting room, picked up every voice vibration with surgical precision. Helena listened in real time as the conspiracy unfolded. "Everything ready, Felipe?" Arthur's voice rang out, thick with satisfaction. "Dr. Asunción assured me that the transfer of power and the divorce will be simultaneous. Tomorrow, at dinner. Her gift." Felipe responded with the arrogant calm of someone who has never known defeat. "The legal process is ironclad. Mom's offshore accounts are already dry. She has no access to anything other than the house maintenance fund. Laura's jewelry store was secured with the investment bonds we took from her portfolio. She's an architect, Father, not a financier. She won't notice anything until it's too late." Then came Barbara's voice, sweet as honey, cold as a blade. "The legal phase is crucial, but phase 2 is the most important. Arthur, the Mendes group is worth much more without the visionary matriarch around. She has too much memory of the system. It's a risk. And, frankly, her security record is a threat to our new management model." The silence was brief, broken by Arthur's dry laugh. "Helena's going to the farm, far away. We don't need to get dirty." Barbara, after a measured pause, dropped the harshest sentence. "I suggest we reconsider. Widowers are easier to manage." The words cut through Helena like an electric shock. It wasn't just the divorce. It wasn't just the theft. They were planning to eliminate her. Arthur's betrayal was predictable, but the children's coldness was like a dagger stuck without anesthesia. They mocked the software engineer who raised them, the woman who taught them to think. She was no longer a mother, nor a wife. She was merely an obstacle. In that moment, Helena made her choice. She wouldn't fight to save her marriage, it was already dead. She wouldn't cry over her children's ingratitude, they had sold out. Her mission would be greater, to dismantle the entire criminal machinery, to destroy the house of cards that dared to believe it could survive without the master password. Helena closed her laptop with a sharp snap. Her heart pounded as if it were about to burst from her chest, but her expression was unsettlingly serene. For years, she had learned to control her body in tense meetings and presentations to shareholders. Now, that skill had become her armor. Inside, she felt betrayed, cut to pieces. On the outside, she displayed only silence. She got up from her library chair and walked to the window. São Paulo, below, pulsed with red and white. Car headlights, horns, the chaos of the metropolis. Each light seemed like a variable in a complex system. And Helena, as always, began to calculate. They had underestimated her. They thought she was just the absent-minded engineer who let lawyers handle contracts, the wife who didn't read the legal fine print, the mother who signed papers without question. Their mistake was confusing discretion with weakness. That night, she didn't sleep. With her hair tied back in a makeshift bun and her glasses perched on the bridge of her nose, Helena opened a hidden terminal on her private system. It wasn't a machine connected to the Mendes Group's main network. It was her digital vault, created in her youth as a personal project. There, no password had been changed without her knowledge. No hack would succeed. The first step was to clone the Mendes Group servers. Instead of copying the data, she set up a real-time mirror. This allowed her to observe every transaction, every code change, every account movement. Within hours, she discovered Felipe's trail, a backdoor inserted into the financial systems, discreetly diverting funds to support Aura jewelry. The transfers were disguised as international consulting, but the invoices were fake, recycled from old documents. Helena smiled. The boy she carried in her arms thought he was brilliant, but he made basic mistakes that any amateur hacker would avoid. But what caught his attention most was Barbara's criminal engineering. The files hidden in her personal directory contained falsified security reports, vulnerability assessments disguised to appear as external discoveries, when, in fact, they were intentionally created breaches. It was a double game, weakening the system to allow the embezzlement while simultaneously blaming Helena for security failures in management. Her mind racing, Helena knew she couldn't act alone. Going to traditional lawyers would be risky. All the big names were in Artur's hands. Then she remembered someone, Patricia Campos, a forensic auditor with whom she had worked years ago on an international compliance project. Patricia owed Artur nothing and had an impeccable reputation. The next morning, Helena arranged a discreet meeting at a cafe on Haddock Lobo Street. They sat in a secluded corner, and Helena handed Patricia an encrypted flash drive. "Track Barbara," she said quietly but firmly. "I want to know if there's a pattern. Business owners, CEOs, any connection to sudden deaths. She's not just a consultant. I'm pretty sure she's done this before." Patricia raised her eyebrows, but didn't question it. She just nodded. "It's going to be expensive," she said. "It's already paid for," Helena replied, sliding over a small, high-security cryptocurrency wallet. Back at the penthouse, Helena decided to take the next step. She needed physical evidence. During the early hours of the morning, while everyone was asleep, she discreetly broke into Barbara's private office. In the cabinet, she found a sealed bottle of water. It wasn't just any bottle, it was imported, hard to find in Brazil. Helena used a portable spectral scanner from her personal collection to analyze the inside surface of the glass. The result was immediate. Traces of a slow-acting toxin, nearly undetectable in standard tests. A poison used in microdoses, perfect for simulating heart attacks. A chill ran down Helena's spine. The bottle wasn't just a risk to her, it was also a risk to Artur. Barbara wasn't just planning to replace her wife. She was planning to eliminate the CEO himself. When he returned to his private office, he found something even more devastating. An email from Laura to Felipe. The tone was mocking and derisive. She signed the guarantee for the jewelry store's bonds without reading the waiver clause. So predictable, our robot mom. She thinks she still has control over something. Helena closed her eyes. The daughter she had cradled, the daughter she had helped take her first steps, treated her like an idiot. There was no longer any doubt. They didn't see her as a mother, nor as a partner. She was just an obstacle, a useful signature. It was Patricia who confirmed the final suspicions 2 days later. She called in the early hours of the morning, her voice urgent. "Helena, I found the pattern. 3 CEOs in 10 years, all linked to Barbara. 2 officially died of a heart attack. The third, a stroke. All had substantial insurance policies. Shares transferred days before their deaths. And guess what? In all cases, consulting firms linked to her benefited soon after." Helena listened in silence. It wasn't just about her life anymore. It was about a history of corporate murders. Barbara was a serial predator. Patricia had also contacted Chief Inspector Almeida, a financial crimes specialist with a history of discreet investigations. He was willing to open a preliminary investigation under seal, but he needed time. Helena knew she didn't have time. Dinner was in a few hours. That's when he decided on his final plan. He called Dr. Ricardo Assis, his trusted lawyer since his youth, a man of integrity and loyalty. "Ricardo," he said firmly, "tomorrow you'll see me sign everything. Don't interfere. Just wait. When I leave, you'll trigger timing 0. 12 digital files, Federal Revenue, Federal Police, CVM, Press, all at the same time." On the other end of the line, there was silence. Then, a sigh. "Helena, this is war." "No, Ricardo, this is justice." The day of the dinner arrived like a nightmare disguised as a party. The rooftop was filled with flower arrangements, crystal tables, and expensive champagne. The atmosphere reeked of wealth, but also of decay. Helena, wearing a simple black dress, entered as if she were merely a guest at her own birthday party. Artur gave a pompous speech, praising his life partner, speaking of shared sacrifices. Every word was an insult. At 9:30 p.m., as expected, Dr. Asunção arrived with a leather briefcase. Inside were all the documents: divorce, waivers, asset transfers. Helena leafed through them calmly. She signed each page with the diamond pen Arthur had given her years ago, looking each conspirator in the eye. Arthur, surprised, murmured, "That's unexpected. You're not going to argue?" Helena raised her gaze and rested it on Barbara, who smiled contentedly. "What's done is done. My only gift to you is my absence." She stood up, kissed each of her children coldly on the forehead, and approaching Arthur, whispered in his ear, "I always knew you were a weak actor, but you taught me to be an excellent screenwriter." He walked out the door as they celebrated the emptiest victory of their lives. But the real play began now. The minute his car left the garage, Ricardo activated the protocol. 12 encrypted data packets flew to authorities, regulators, and newspapers. The Mendez group would implode not in months but in hours. The first downfall was personal. Laura and Felipe's accounts were frozen. Aura jewelry was sealed in less than 10 minutes, amidst the flashlights of stunned neighbors. At Grupo Mendez, the biggest bombshell, Helena didn't destroy the system. She merely exposed the vulnerabilities created by Artur and Felipe. Falsified security reports, intentional flaws, tax evasion. All of this was leaked to the press and clients. The stock began to plummet. The next morning dawned gray in São Paulo. The city bustled with its usual hurried pace, but on the newsstands, on news websites, and on the television screens scattered throughout cafes and airports, there was only one name: Helena Castro. The headlines were devastating. The Mendez empire has fallen. The silent genius exposes fraud, conspiracy, and murder. Helena Castro, the mind behind the code that brought down the giant. From luxury to prison, the scandal that shook Faria Lima Avenue. The photo that illustrated the covers was symbolic. Helena, in profile, taken at a conference years ago, her eyes fixed on a code screen. Her serene face contrasted with the images beside it. Federal police officers leading Artur Mendez in handcuffs through the penthouse garage, her face still arrogant, trying to maintain a dignity that no longer existed. Felipe Mendez, Harvard's brilliant heir, emerged next. His suit was rumpled, his hair disheveled, and his hands tied behind his back. The Mendez Group financial advisor was now making headlines about tax evasion, multi-million-dollar fraud, and market manipulation. Onlookers gathered in front of the building. Some filmed with raised cell phones, others shouted insults. "Thieves! Leeches! The farce is over." In less than 24 hours, the family that cultivated an image of perfection and absolute power had become a public spectacle of downfall. Meanwhile, television channels replayed excerpts from the dossiers Helena sent, recordings of secret meetings, falsified contracts, evidence of embezzlement. Artur's hoarse voice echoed through the TV. "Helena is going to the farm, far away. Let's not get dirty." All of Brazil heard it. The facade was over. Barbara Ramos was next to fall. The always impeccable senior design consultant was detained by the federal police on Friday morning. During a search of her apartment, they found the vial of the toxin carefully stored in a digital safe. Experts confirmed it. It was a lethal substance, difficult to detect, consistent with slow poisoning. The news spread like wildfire. The CEO's lover and accomplice was planning a series of murders. Laura Mendez, the favorite daughter, was also taken to testify. Police revealed that her luxury jewelry store, Aurora, had been supported by illicit investments from the Mendez Group. Jewels valued at millions were seized, display cases sealed, and employees were humiliated at the store's entrance after the federal police closed the premises. Although released on bail, Laura left the courtroom through the back door, avoiding the cameras. But there was no escaping the headline: "Jewelry princess involved in money laundering." In the cold corridors of the police station, Artur still tried to maintain his version of events. In his testimony, he insisted that it was all a cunning plan by his resentful wife. But the more he spoke, the more the evidence spoke against him. With each document presented, each recording shown, his credibility crumbled like the empire he thought indestructible. And the audience watched, mesmerized. There was no soap opera more intriguing than the fall of a royal empire. What took more than 3 decades to build began to crumble in less than 48 hours. On Friday afternoon, the Brazilian Securities and Exchange Commission, CVM, immediately suspended Grupo Mendes's shares from the stock exchange. The report released by the authorities based on Helena's files pointed to market manipulation, insider trading, and falsification of financial statements. Within minutes, investors who had bet millions fled like people abandoning a burning ship. The stock price plummeted, dragging down investment funds, foreign partners, and small startups that depended on the group. On Faria Lima, once a hub of pride and power, the name Mendes became synonymous with scandal and betrayal. On Saturday, the Federal Revenue Service froze accounts linked to the family. Mansions in Campos do Jordão, homes in Miami, and wineries in Chile were frozen as assets under investigation. Luxury cars that were previously driven by private drivers were now under judicial custody. The empire, once shielded by lawyers and lobbyists, had been besieged on all sides. Corporate clients also reacted. Major tech companies broke billion-dollar contracts, alleging breach of trust. Trade magazines ran the headline, "Mendes Group exposed client data to catastrophic risks to enrich heirs." Laura's jewelry store, Aurora, was the most symbolic blow. On Sunday, the federal police officially sealed the store's windows in Jardins. The images made the rounds on television, darkened windows, necklaces and diamonds being packed into boxes by forensic experts, employees crying as they were dismissed. The jewelry princess was exposed not as a visionary entrepreneur, but as the direct beneficiary of a dirty scheme. By Monday morning, the Mendes family was no longer seen as elite. They were social outcasts. Invitations were canceled, advertising contracts were terminated, and even longtime friends deleted photos and mentions from social media. What was once reverence turned to contempt. Artur Mendes tried to resist. From temporary detention, he sent messages through lawyers stating that he would regain control of the company. But when he called the group's internal systems, he discovered that his access had been blocked. On every screen, a single message flashed, cold and implacable. "The session has been terminated. The mind password has been changed." It was Helena's silent signature, a reminder of who had always been the true guardian of that empire. And so, in less than a week, what seemed unbreakable turned to dust. The Mendes Group went into receivership, while newspapers and news outlets called the episode the biggest business collapse of the century. For the Mendes family, there was nothing left but shame. 6 months have passed since the collapse of the Mendes Group, and the world seemed to have turned an irreversible page. Helena Castro was no longer in São Paulo. She no longer wore the glasses of an exhausted businesswoman, nor the weight of a life shaped by manipulation, betrayal, and false appearances. Now she found herself in a sleek yet understated design office in the heart of New York. Morning sunlight streamed through the enormous windows, reflecting off the clean, modern lines of the desks, the glass walls, and the cutting-edge technology that dominated the space. The sense of freedom was almost tangible. Every click of the keyboard, every project analyzed, every meeting with engineers and designers was conducted under her absolute control. But without the suffocating pressure of having to prove something to a family or society that only values facades. She was free. Finally free. Nova Corporation, a longtime rival of the Mendes Group, had recognized not only her technological genius but also her unwavering integrity. The offer was clear: to become President of Innovation and Global CTO, leading the overhaul of security systems and digital architecture on a global scale. Helena accepted not for the power, but for the opportunity to build something worthwhile, free from lies and manipulation. While reviewing a new security protocol that promised to make Nova Corporation the most armored in the world, his phone rang. It was Dr. Ricardo Assis, his trusted lawyer. "Helena, the courts have officially recognized that your actions were not revenge, but defense against serious crimes," he said, his voice firm but with a hint of relief. "You managed to recover only what was necessary to maintain your comfortable life, but the greatest prize was your freedom." Helena smiled, closing her eyes for a moment. Every detail of that sentence carried the weight of years of betrayal, sleepless nights, and meticulous planning. She needed nothing more than her autonomy and dignity restored. That same morning, as she watched the first rays of sunlight reflect on her monitor, she realized how much had changed. Aurora's jewelry, which had once symbolized her family's financial manipulation, was now just a reminder of a past she had transcended. The jewelry she created for clients in New York had real meaning. Each piece told stories of resilience, and honesty. On the other side of the world in São Paulo, what remained of the Mendes family was nothing but ruins. Arthur and Felipe were detained, facing charges of fraud, tax evasion, and corporate negligence. Barbara Ramos awaited trial under investigation for murder and conspiracy. Laura Mendes, discredited and without her jewelry store, tried to rebuild her life amid the humiliation portrayed in the media. The empire that seemed eternal collapsed under the weight of its own corruption. Helena didn't feel joy at their downfall. She felt relief. For the first time in decades, she could breathe without the constant fear of betrayal or losing everything she had built. Every decision made, every code revised, every step taken in New York was a testament to its rebuilding and sovereignty. She stood, walked to the large office window, and looked out at the pulsing city below. Freedom smelled of fresh coffee, concrete, and possibilities. The feeling was almost physical. She owed no one anything, and in that moment, Helena Castro understood the true lesson she had learned through pain, betrayal, and strategic intelligence. Competence and character are the most valuable currencies. They stole her life, tried to erase her presence, but forgot to change the password to the mind behind the empire. And so the empire became hers, rebuilt on new terms, unattainable, and free of any shadow of falsehood. Sitting at her desk, she smiled for the first time without caution. Every project she developed, every system she designed was an extension of her unstoppable mind. Helena didn't just get her revenge, she redefined herself. The legacy she would leave to the world wouldn't be in jewels or dollar signs, but in steel, code, ethics, and freedom. And as the sun rose high over Manhattan, Helena Castro knew that finally the story was hers alone. A story of power, redemption, and reinvention, and she would write it the way she always wanted, with conscience, courage, and absolute control of her destiny.